Hi, and welcome to a really special edition of Your Health with Dr. Christy on the road. We're waiting for a train to continue to travel further into Italy. We're going to Venice later today. So far, I've traveled from Austin to Paris, Paris to Switzerland, Switzerland via train into Italy. And it's been fascinating to see how Europe has handled COVID. One of the first things I've noticed is that everyone is very compliant with masks, and most people actually are wearing the KN95. I think they're very easy to get. Every store carries some. There's not difficulty getting the KN95. The other thing I've noticed is that testing is widely available, PCR and antigen testing. It's available for free. Even though we're foreigners, we were able to get antigen testing free of charge without any issues or problems. So far, I've done 4 antigen tests, one in the States, one in Paris, one in my hotel room, and one upon leaving Switzerland to come into France. So just to continue to prove that we're negative, I'll have to do one more antigen test before flying back to the United States again. And I'm hoping that we continue to stay negative. I know that in Switzerland, if you test positive for COVID, the government will mandate downloading an app onto your phone, and they mandate a 5-day quarantine, and they track your movements to make sure that you're continuing to stay in your hotel room or wherever you're staying. After that mandatory 5-day quarantine, you then have to have a physician give you clearance to end the quarantine so that you can continue your movements, like get on a plane or leave your hotel room or whatever. And I think that's fascinating. As an American, I know that Americans would struggle with this amount of oversight. Another thing that I had to get before coming over was a COVID pass. You carry it on your phone, and it has a special barcode that's linked to my vaccination record with my immunization, my passport, and my information about coming into the country. So they're able to really literally track me throughout all of these countries. The COVID passport that I got for Switzerland is accepted in all of the EU. So we're able to use that in France, and now we're also able to use that in Italy, which is great. Should I take my mask down?
Sure.
Okay, we're on the streets of Rome. We're getting our final antigen test before we can get on the plane to head back to the United States tomorrow. We tested in our hotel room with our own rapid test that we brought, and we're negative this morning. This is just sort of a final hurdle before we get on the plane. This has been sort of the most, not problematic, but you have to pay for this one, 22 euros cash, and you have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, which your passport number and your email and just a lot of information. So we're gonna head in and get the test.
Yes, sir.
Great in. Relax, relax.
Otherwise, I can go inside.
Relax.
Oh my gosh.
He does this all day. He's like, he's used to it.
I'm not really hurt. I've done this like 5 times.
Oof. Woo! It's a lot. Yeah, no, he wasn't too bad. How'd you do?
Thank you.
Okay, y'all, I do not understand why they are going so far back. There's just no need for an antigen test, but I cannot convince them not to do that. That was my poor friend Melissa started crying. I said, please don't go so far back, and he didn't go super far back, but still you just do not need to do that. For an antigen test, you just need to do the anterior nares. I don't understand. I can't convince them otherwise, but it's done. Now they'll email us our results. Here's hoping and praying that we're negative so we can get on a plane tomorrow. Okay, so we're in the Rome International Airport. Interesting fact, as you walk in, they have men remove their hats because they have a temperature sensor that is scanning you as you come in to pull out people coming in with any sort of temperature. Thought that was fascinating. Another fun fact, before you're able to sit in a restaurant, you must do another Super Green Pass check-in. Thankfully, our Swiss COVID certification will work. While we were sitting in the airport restaurant waiting for our food, we noticed that there was a ticker showing the total number of Italians that had received at least one vaccination, then the total number of Italians that had received a booster, and then the percentage of Italians that had received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. Fascinating. Well, we had an uneventful flight home from Rome. And at the end of the day, would I go to Europe again, and would I encourage someone to go to Europe again? My answer is yes, but with some caveats. I think it's important for anyone that decides to go to be prepared for a couple of things. I would recommend that you get fully vaccinated and have your vaccinations be fresh, meaning that if you're due for a booster, I would recommend getting it a couple of weeks before your trip to make sure that everything is up to date. Secondly, I would be sure to purchase some personal antigen tests to take along with you. One thing that I knew was important was that I did not want an official positive COVID test on any governmental testing. So the way we approached that was, before we needed to have any official test before going into another country, we would do an antigen test in our hotel room, because I knew that if one of us were positive, we wanted to manage our own quarantine. Because I wasn't really sure if the countries that we were visiting were up to date with the recommendations that the CDC has made, meaning that we no longer needed a 10-day quarantine. It had been recently changed to 5 days. And I didn't know if other countries were using that same timeline or not. Another thing that I would bring with me is plenty of KN95 masks. As we moved from France to Switzerland to Italy, the restrictions seemed to get a little bit tighter. You know, in France, we weren't required to wear a special mask. In Switzerland, we were required to have the Swiss passport. And in Italy, not only were we required to have the Swiss passport, COVID passport, we were also required to wear KN95 masks or the equivalent in any indoor spaces, on the train, on the airplane, and they even recommended masking outdoors, although I didn't see that they were mandating KN95 masks outdoors. And another thing that you need is plenty of flexibility, meaning that if someone in your party becomes positive, that means that you're going to have to change your return flight and possibly change your itinerary when you're in Europe. So thankfully, Matt and I have some flexibility with our jobs and with our childcare. But if you don't have flexibility with childcare or with your job, then I'm not sure going to Europe right now would be a good fit. Another thing is that you have to feel pretty comfortable with tracking and releasing some of your personal data. So we as Americans struggled with that a bit. Our entire group did, especially as we were getting our last antigen test in Italy. They wanted to release our COVID tests within an app on our phone, which also would have been able to track our movements and let them know contact tracing. And we were not comfortable with that. So we had to jump through a couple of more hoops in order to get it delivered to our email on our phone and not delivered to an app on our phone. I'm sincerely hoping that what we're seeing in Britain We will also start to continue to see in other European countries as well, with the relaxation of masking requirements and documentation and COVID testing and things like that. So things are going to continue to change very rapidly, and hopefully we'll continue to get more and more open. It was quite an adventure, and one that I feel really blessed that we were able to do. Not having the crowds was just really amazing, and that was one benefit of traveling right now. One thing that I didn't like to have to deal with on our trip was the underlying anxiety with the testing. You know, we had to test multiple times in multiple countries to move from one country to the next, and just having that low level of anxiety of what if one of us were to test positive was not my favorite. So that's another thing you have to contend with if you travel to Europe during this time. But at the end of the day, it was quite an adventure, and I'm really thankful you guys were able to see just a small part of our trip. Thanks so much for joining me.